Welcome back to Kill or Cure, where we take an unfiltered look at the trends, policies, and the innovations shaping health, wealth, and everything in between. I'm Todd Perman, founder of Seed Healthcare, and my co-host is Bill Liao, a GP, entrepreneur, and someone who's never afraid to stir the pot when it comes to challenging the status quo. Bill, any comments before we get started?
Yeah, just one. When you say GP on a health podcast, people are inclined to think that I'm a doctor. I'm not. I'm a general partner in an investment firm. So just want to clarify that. I never want to be accused of having any kind of degrees.
That sounds like good clarification and a great segue to introducing our guest, which is a doctor, an actual doctor, Bill Kapp, who's a physician, entrepreneur, and longevity pioneer. He's the CEO of Fountain Life. And Dr. Kapp, I would love for you to kind of kick it off with just introducing your background and what got you going past medical school and kind of what your journey's been in longevity.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today, and it's great to see both of you guys again. Look, I mean, my background is been a little bit eclectic, and it's largely been in search of how do you improve the overall healthcare delivery in the U.S. and worldwide. And my background, traditionally, I went to medical school like everybody else, but I also have a background in molecular genetics. And while I was in medical school, got very captivated with the idea of orthopedic surgery, being able to detect problems and then actually fix them for the first time, because so much of medicine had been largely focused on symptom-based care. Orthopedics offered me an opportunity to use the latest technology and to kind of repair the human body. And I think what was fascinating, it was about 8 or 10 years ago when we first started to see the technology for the very first time that could impact medicine probably more dramatically than anything else, meaning that we could detect disease at its earliest stages while you were still asymptomatic. And I think, this comes, I come about this relatively honestly in that, I'm a jet pilot and I was an Air Force flight surgeon. And I can just tell you that, we don't get in our airplanes without doing significant pre-flight checks. And also we look to find problems before they begin. And so when we started to see the emergence of this technology 8 to 10 years ago, it was very clear for me, having been in the hospital space and having built and developed 9 hospitals and having built surgery centers and imaging centers, that healthcare was never going to be fixed until we could detect the disease problems early and fix them early, where they're less expensive and certainly less deterministic in terms of being able to intervene in somebody's disease pattern. So I started a company called Longevity Performance Center about 8 years ago. And about 4.5, 5 years ago, Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis showed up and they said, look, we love what you guys are doing. Can we expand this concept further? And so that's the journey we've been on for the last 4 years or so. And we're really excited about it because we're seeing the emergence of this technology at such a rapid pace that it's going to make a massive impact on healthcare. And the healthcare system, unfortunately, today, the way it's currently rendered, is still relatively slow in adopting this technology, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But that's my journey, that's my story, and the idea here is to, how do you find new things to improve the lives of people around the world?
That's amazing. One of the notable things that I think you came out of orthopedics and really the sick care system and ran hospitals. I mean, like really deep into the challenges and problems. So you are better suited to kind of navigate some of the sick care challenges than others. Anything you can think of when it comes to like the hospital environment and what the struggle is? I think there's a huge paradigm shift that needs to happen from preventative care all the way through to, really treating beyond the symptoms and getting to the root cause of it, which is, I know, the Fountain premise, but is that what really drove you, was the brokenness of the system?
Yeah, well, so Todd, I think, what was very interesting to me, or at least, my evolution, is that I had trying to fill gaps in healthcare. So I built long-term acute care hospitals, which are critical care hospitals for people who really need that extra 30 days of care post-discharge from a hospital. But our patients were unbelievably sick. And we were in very select markets where there just weren't much of those, there wasn't a good access to that type of service. And so we kind of selectively went into markets that were underserved and being able to provide this service for people. But what it became very clear is that so many of the patients we were treating end stage disease. And when you actually dissected through and started to see what the etiology is for this end stage disease process, what you realized was that about 80 to 90% of people that we were treating at late stage, end stage disease had an opportunity somewhere in their past to take a different road, meaning to be able to, if they had had access to technology and information about themselves and been able to know what behavioral changes, everything from diet to exercise to medications, to be able to detect and treat these things early, we would have never seen them in our hospital late. And so when you realize that 80 to 90% of what we're treating today is chronic disease and it doesn't even become symptomatic until it's late stage, we're missing the biggest opportunity, which was to intercept problems before they begin. And I think, it's interesting because almost every other industry does exactly this. I spoke to a conference of tech executives recently. They're involved in computer security, and their entire world is prevention. They're trying to stop the hack. And yet in medicine, we're really good at kind of waiting until you break and then we go to fix you. And so I think that was the big driver for me, understanding that, we could certainly continue where we're going in U.S. healthcare, and it'll continue to, eke along. But the problem with it is right now it's absorbing about $5 trillion. And we spend about half of the world's entire healthcare spend just in the United States. And yet our results are less than admirable. If you were to spend that anywhere else, in any other country, you would expect a lot higher results, and we just don't have it right now.
I've heard you say, Bill,
Amazing. Yeah, and I see the same trends. I'm sure Bill has.
Yeah,
But
I've heard you say, Bill, that you shouldn't die of anything stupid. How many people do you think are dying of ignorance at the moment rather than stupidity? Because stupidity is the infinite resource,
Yeah.
whereas ignorance is something that you can actually cure.
No, I appreciate that, and I think that's very true. Look, we say it with a little bit of tongue in cheek when we say don't die of anything stupid, and that's usually when we're addressing an audience that is seeking a solution and maybe on the fence about whether or not they should go through this type of diagnostic, testing. But it is very clear that there is a very large gap in education of the population about what technology is really available today and what is really available to them outside of the traditional, insurance system. Because if you're waiting for health insurance to pay for it, you may be there a really long time before you can access this type of technology. And I think the reality is today, the vast majority of people in the United States have health insurance for catastrophic claims, and most of the rest of their healthcare spend is out of pocket. And I think the reality is that people are coming to the realization that your healthcare insurance company is not there to keep you healthy, and the system isn't either. And you're going to have to find a way to access these technologies on your own. What we're hoping to do is educate people as to what is available, what is truly available that they can avail themselves of to be able to kind of get these insights into their health so that they don't have to live with the problems that, chronic disease creates late.
I totally get that. As a type 2 diabetic who is doing some preventative medicine right now on my treadmill, I recently had a cardiac analysis that showed I have a 0 calcium score. That Todd keeps telling me that actually isn't a very useful thing to know. Would you agree?
I think it doesn't tell you the complete picture. So, what we talk about a lot, and Todd and I have had this discussion on multiple occasions, in medicine, because of our tool set, it was relatively limited for such a very long time. And the way we're trained in medicine is we're trained not to treat or not to go looking for things, is what I always tell people. We're kind of dissuaded from using advanced testing for looking for other problems. And some of that has to do with false positives, which we can get into later. But it is very clear that most of the tests that we do in medicine are what I would call inferential, meaning there is an association with a calcium score and cardiac disease, but it doesn't tell you exactly what type of plaque you have, how much plaque you have. And by the way, if you have a lot, mainly soft plaque, it's not going to detect that at all because the soft plaque has to become calcified over time. There is technology now available, which we started using 4 years ago. And when I keep talking about this lack of understanding of where the technology is, right now, from the time the technology is available and proven by the FDA to be effective to the time it's widely employed in medicine is about 17 years. So it's called the clinical latency gap, and it doesn't seem to be getting any shorter. It seems to be actually getting larger, and that's largely because of the advances we're finding in the new technologies that we keep finding. But in your case, what you really require is an outpatient cardiac CT angiography or coronary CT angiography. And what that is, when read with AI, will tell you exactly what quantity of plaque you have, if you have any. And if your calcium score is 0 and you have 0 plaque, congratulations, you're in a very august group of people. Maybe 20% of people have 0 plaque, or 10% of people have 0 plaque. 90% of people have usually some form of plaque. And the question is, how severe is it? Number one, and number two, how do you reverse it? And those tools right now exist to be able to do this as a relatively simple outpatient test. It takes less than an hour. It takes about 7 minutes in the CT scanner, a little dye in your vein, quick procedure, and then we do a quick CAT scan of your heart, and then we take that and we feed it into an AI algorithm that can quantify exactly how much plaque you have. So for the first time, you have a target and an absolute measure of how much cardiac disease you have, and then you can start to attack that through multiple ways to start to either stop it from progressing or possibly even reverse it.
Would you say that people giving out 0 calcium scores and a pat on the head, which is what my cardiologist gave me after that CT scan, would you say that that is fair for them to be doing that? Or is it that they just haven't skilled up and they don't know the truth?
So I would think it's the latter, to be quite honest with you. And I think a lot of this has to do with, unfortunately, the way our healthcare system is designed is that doctors generally don't learn about tests or are not exposed to tests that are not reimbursed by insurance companies. And so this idea that you can pay for testing outside of the traditional insurance or the government reimbursement environment is not really, it's a little foreign to patients, and they're really not sure why the government's not providing these tests. And the implication is if the government doesn't pay for it, it's not legit. Well, the reality is the government is always behind. And if you're waiting for the government to come to the rescue, you're probably going to wait a really long time because they're not very good at rescuing you until it's a dumpster fire. But I think what happens with the patient, with doctors particularly, it's doctors tend to train, unfortunately, on a generational basis. So they're on top of the cutting edge when they come out of residency. And then generally speaking, their skill set declines over time. Maybe not their surgical skill set or their diagnostic acumen, but their ability and their desire to learn new things does decline over time. And because they're not in a constant learning environment, unless you're in an academic center, a private practice cardiologist will use the tools at their disposal. And even calcium scoring is a little bit controversial inside this system. Most people would rather take you to the cath lab if you have chest pain than do a CCTA. So there's some, perverse incentives as well. But I would also tell you that I think there is going to be an opportunity with AI to skill up cardiologists and other physicians to be able to understand where this technology exists. Now, I do believe with the explosion of artificial intelligence and the ability for our AI for the very first time to be able to look at your data and you to have access to your own private AI or personal AI that can look at your data, that's going to give you more information and more power for the first time. And information in this game of healthcare is power. And once you have information and you know what your body is and your full quantification state of your body is to the best with the best technology we have today, then you can start to seek the alternatives, because it may turn out that while you may like your cardiologist, if he's not up to speed, you may want to find somebody that is. And the trick is to know the technology that's available to you.
Yeah, I'm right now battling the hospital to try and get my CT scan results in digital format so I can upload them to an AI and have them looked at. So there's some bureaucracy in the way as well. Fortunately, on the reversing side of plaques, we have this up and coming drugs like Clarity, which looks like it's going to be able to make plaques disappear completely, which will upend everything. So then the whole issue goes away. It would be a kind of miracle. I heard you say the other day that even some very intractable diseases like ALS, they're finding treatments for. That was fascinating. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, so happy to do that. So it's a new company that we've just begun working with, and it's a fantastic technology that was created by Dr. Zhao. So what it uses is the idea here, with ALS, it has an autoimmune component. There are lots of diseases we know of that have autoimmune components, meaning your body tends to attack itself. And that can be for a number of reasons. Certain antigens or at least proteins on the cells get exposed to your immune system that your immune system's just not used to seeing for whatever reason. And it could be anything from like inflammatory bowel disease to Crohn's disease to rheumatoid arthritis, but your body begins to attack itself. And so what the goal when Dr. Zhao did his training originally and what he's done over the last 20 to 30 years, he has found a way to re-educate your immune cells. And so what he's done, and I've been able to perfect, is a technique where he binds cord blood stem cells, which are really day zero stem cells. And when you're looking for stem cell therapies, you want to get the youngest stem cells that you can because they have huge ability to moderate and to affect changes in older cells. But what he found was when he co-incubated and would run these, take your white cells out, your immune cells out, and your white cell fraction, and he does this through a machine. It's almost like a dialysis machine. We take off a certain fraction of your white blood cells, and then he co-incubates them overnight with these cord blood stem cells. And it turns out that those cord blood stem cells re-educate your white blood cells to a different status, meaning that they no longer will recognize parts of your body as being foreign, and it literally moderates the immune response. And we've seen amazing results with some of our patients we've sent there, but particularly with things like ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's Lou Gehrig's disease is the most common, layman's term for it. But that's where your body kind of attacks your own nerves, and you start to lose motor function. And unfortunately, with Lou Gehrig's disease, over time you might even get so severe that you can no longer breathe because your muscles can no longer contract well enough to be able to fill your lungs with air. So what this does, though, and what we've seen in early stages where people could not raise their arms anymore over their head, and after one treatment, because the white cells have been immune and the nerves are allowed to recover once you get rid of the fact that the autoimmune process is attacking your nerve cells. Once the nerves recover, the motor function returns. And it was really quite remarkable. There's a patient who couldn't lift his arms over his head, could barely stand up, and now he can stand up and he can lift his arms over his head. Now, we don't know exactly, we think this may be a one and done therapy, but even if it's not, right now there are no great treatments for Lou Gehrig's disease. We're seeing the same thing. He's got great data also around treating type 1 diabetes. Which is an autoimmune component as well. And so if you catch young people or people who are new onset type 1 diabetics in their very early stages while they still have some islet cell function, beta islet cell function, you can actually reverse that immune process. So these are all things that are in the pipeline. Obviously drugs like Cyclarity that Cyclarity is developing are tremendously important as well because this idea of, once again, early detection and early treatment. And that should be the gold standard. Early detection, long before you're symptomatic in most cases for things like cardiac disease, neurodegenerative disease, metabolic disease, and cancer. But the idea here is don't wait until it's late. Let's get it early, and then let's treat it early. Because first of all, we know that if we can just start to address the 80% of the chronic diseases that are driving our healthcare burden in the United States, we could probably drop healthcare costs in half. But it's going to take a reorientation of how we think about healthcare, because we've all been so conditioned, and we're conditioned from the time we're children, right? I mean, you're told by your mother from day one, you don't go to the doctor unless you're really sick. Well, that's great, when you have a cold or you have, maybe something that you think may be minor. But the good news is that all of those minor concerns are going to be able to be addressed by AI. And hopefully with technology, we'll be able to address things even further upstream as you age so that we can avoid these late stage complications.
I fortunately skipped that message because I come from a family of hypochondriacs, literally. Um, Unfortunately, a very dear friend of mine died of ALS about 5 years ago, probably before this treatment was available, because like he had any amount of money to spend on his treatment and he didn't make it. What sort of cost is involved in that treatment?
We're right now that cost is out of pocket. It's expensive. It's $30,000. But if it turns out it's only one or two treatments, it's a fraction of what the long-term disability could be.
Although I know people who can scrape together 30 grand if it's going to give them another year of health, even. So that's great news that it's that cost effective. Um, I expect that surgery is going to be very much cheaper. Horses for courses. I got to ask, take a different tack. I got to ask you, what is the counterintuitive health hack that you yourself do to stay fitter
Great one.
based on everything you've learned?
Oh, I think that if I tell people all the time, if there's one thing that you should do, bar none, is get as much muscle mass as you can get. I mean, the data around muscle mass is incontrovertible. The largest studies in the world have been done, whether it be from the Karolinska Institute or even for the Cooper Clinic. Those people who have the highest muscle mass live the longest, live the most disease-free, and are the most robust up until the end of their lives. And that is, once again, that's an easy hack. You have to get in the gym. You have to do the work. We tell our members when they go through Fountain Life, and we do these, because early detection of disease is super important. But it's also metabolic disease. It's how do we start to correct the underlying cellular dysfunction that is leading to these problems. And it turns out the biggest hack you can do is exercise. Exercise, if we could bottle it or put it in a pill form, we would do it because it has such amazing multiple system effects, and particularly weight training. And as an orthopedic surgeon, I was trained that muscle was largely for locomotion, and it's what connected and allowed you to move through the modern world as we speak as a bipedal animal. However, what I was never taught is what has been the data that's come out in the last 5 to 10 years, which is really showing that when you weight train, you improve brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it can improve your cognition, you can lower your inflammatory levels. Certainly, the more muscle you have, it becomes a big sink for glucose. So when you're trying to control, when you're really trying to control your blood sugar, and you want to get your hemoglobin A1C and your fasting blood sugars and all your just resting blood sugar as low as you can, the best way to do that is to have a very large organ that likes to consume sugar or likes to become a sink for sugar. And it turns out muscle mass is very important for that. And secondarily, the people with the highest muscle mass have the strongest immune function. And there's some really interesting technology we could talk about on how do we boost the immune function, because ultimately immune dysfunction is what leads to most people their development of cancer and other age-related disease processes as well.
And is there a
great.
particular set of muscles that you should grow? Or is it everyone? like a lot of people hate the gym. Like, what's the hack here? Is can you grow smaller muscles and have the same effect? Do we even know?
Unfortunately, it's the large compound muscles that you need the most for locomotion, for bone density, and for cognition. That's going to be the old traditional gym, so to speak. But you have to do compound muscle training. The other thing about, we believe very much in free weight training. And one of the reasons is because it does help train your neurovestibular apparatus. When you're standing there with a squat rack or you're doing a free bench press, you're not only loading your muscles and loading your joints, and you want to load your bones, particularly, especially for women with osteoporosis or osteopenia, because it will drive, as you load the bone, you will drive calcium into the bone. And so that's super important. But also when you're doing free weight training and you're when you're standing and lifting dumbbells, or you're standing and lifting barbells, what happens is it helps to train your neurovestibular apparatus, your brain, and your proprioceptive inputs. And those are very important. Now, you don't get that on a machine. And so we are big believers in this kind of functional training, but large compound movements are really the key. And, I have a COO who's a former bodybuilder, and he always jokes, he said, because he'll say, you don't know what the secret is. And I'll say, yeah, I'd love to know the secret. And everybody leans in and then waiting for the secret. He says, there is no secret, right? You have to get in the gym. You have to do the work. So we can lay the foundation for you. We can give you all the information you need. However, you are going to have to exercise. And that is just 1, 2, and 3. There are no muscle mimetics currently out there that are going to put on muscle nearly as effective. And even if they did, the mere fact that you're strength training increases all of those other things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor and all the anti-inflammatory substances that are generated. And so, once again, we're not meant to be sedentary individuals. Cardio is certainly fine. We like cardio. Cardio is good, but you should not take a back seat to your weight training. Weight training should be number 1, and cardio should be number 2.
And yet, gym memberships are the most underutilized form of expense in the world. So how do you change the mindset such that you just go and do it? Like, I understand from somebody who has a strong willpower to succeed in life that they'll actually go out and do it. We have this tremendous amount of resource for people to go and do it, and they don't, even if they know they should. Any thoughts?
No, I think there are some, and so I will talk a little bit about that because there are some really interesting companies out there that are trying to gamify the experience. And I think part of this is, we've gamified cardio fairly well. I mean, you can get on a treadmill and hike or run through any locale in the world, right? I mean, it's pretty easy. We just throw it up on the screen and you can do that. We've created all kinds of fun things around cardio, whether it be SoulCycle or all of the different gyms with all the different variabilities. Certainly there are the traditional gyms where people go in and do heavy muscle training, and those are more tribes, so certainly that's a way to do it. Join a tribe and find people that are like-minded that want to weight train. That's a great way. That's how we do with our executive team at Fountain. We all get up in the morning when we're together and we're there in the gym at 5 a.m. and so that creates some camaraderie. But there's a company called eGym, which is out there today. We've used eGym before, and it does gamify this experience of weight training. And also, you don't have to be in there for hours. The goal here is to be in like 30 minutes, but do it relatively rapidly and do it with a gamified experience. So with eGym, you use a band or your phone and you go up to the machine and the machine knows who you are. It knows how to set the weight. It knows how to set the seat height, all of that. And then all you do is follow the instructions on the screen. And it shows you a very clear, easy way. It's like doing Pac-Man. It's like playing Pac-Man. For those of you who remember Pac-Man, I'll date myself. But I mean, the reality is you can certainly find ways to gamify this experience. And quite frankly, the results with eGym are really remarkable. Techno Gym has a very similar apparatus. So it's not that you can't do it. And if you don't like weight training, that's fine. Then find one of these locations that can help you gamify the experience and just make yourself do it. The easiest thing to do is find a tribe, find a group of people that are interested in doing what you're doing. And then also you're gonna have to understand, just like most people do, people tend to be very disciplined about certain things in their lives and undisciplined about others. And we're all that way. I mean, there's certain things we could always be better at. Learning to go to the gym is not necessarily an easy thing. It can be an intimidating experience sometimes. And so when you find these boutique gyms, small gyms, or you find locations that have things like eGym, it becomes less intimidating because you can do it at any time of day and you don't need a coach and you don't need to hire a trainer, and the machines and the AI do that for you.
Yeah. You said one thing earlier, Bill Kapp, don't wait until it's too late. I'd say that applies to almost everything. You can't wait until you're 80 to start weight training. I asked my 81-year-old mom about that. She comes up in every conversation. She's like my example. One of the things that frustrates the heck out of me is the misinformation that we hear constantly. The buzzwords, the inferential medicine, the this, the that. I want to demystify that. Every time I talk and get off the podium, somebody is saying, "Oh, I did a scan, I did a blood test, or I did one thing." How do you think we get there and actually demystify the noise? I think that's, if I have one frustrating thing around the whole thing is I've had friends in their 50s die of a heart attack that didn't know it was coming, right? Like nobody should die of a heart attack today. But it goes back to that conversation Bill Liao brought up, which is a calcium score. How do you demystify all of that and kind of do it on a macro scale because of all the marketing that's out there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big problem. I mean, obviously right now, longevity, quote unquote, is one of the hottest areas of social media interaction. I mean, you see people talking about longevity. There are about 3,000 plus longevity clinics or something with longevity in the name, but the reality is most of them aren't collecting data. And our point is we believe the field of longevity has tremendous promise. We also believe that not everything you're hearing about, and matter of fact, the majority of what you're hearing about is not necessarily going to be effective. And you need data. And if you're not collecting data, meaning that if you can't measure it, you really can't manage it. And our goal at Fountain is to create large data pools that we can then ultimately not only provide for our members, but then also collectively be able to apply to other people as well. So I think what's important is when you start looking at what's available out there today, who has scientifically vetted the technology that you're using at your longevity clinic, and are they collecting data? I think those are two really simple bars that you can ask, and if they can't pass either one of those tests, then you might want to look elsewhere. We at Fountain are very, very focused on what works. Look, there's tremendous opportunity in just accelerating FDA approved and FDA trial technology into our memberships to give people exposure to it. There's so much new technology that's available that's just not available in the traditional sick care system. I remind people all the time, your doctor, unfortunately, is not trained to keep you healthy. Okay, they're just not trained. That's not what you go to medical school for. You go to medical school for 4 years. The first 2 years you basically learn basic anatomy, basic science, chemistry, things of this nature. And you also learn what they call pathologic physiology. Meaning that so your first 2 years you do basic training, your basic science. The next 2 years you find yourself in the clinic, and they basically tell you to go interview patients, and you get their symptom complex, and then you match it with the disease, and then we chase you with drugs, drugs and procedures. That's how we do it, because once again, those symptoms that you relate to the doctor is 80% of your diagnosis. The tests that we do are used to confirm that diagnosis. They're not going to go looking for other things. They're not going to look for that stage 1 cardiac problem. They're not going to go look for that stage 1 cancer. They're not looking for that because it's an asymptomatic process. And 80% of what we treat today is chronic disease, and it's asymptomatic until it's late stage. And so I think the challenge is when you talk about friends of yours who've died of heart disease is, once again, because you're asymptomatic, you just presume that you're healthy. And the reality is that's just not true. And the vast majority of people, I would say 50% or better, have something that needs to be addressed. Now, 14% of people in our data, of over 8,000 people, have something that's significant and needs to be addressed right now. 3% have cancers, 3.5% have aneurysms. But the people that have heart disease, we know that 70% of people have their first heart attack will not have a symptom prior to having their heart attack. And if you're relying on your cholesterol and your low cholesterol to be your measure that you're not going to have heart disease, you are not using the right testing and the right tool. Because we can tell you right now, we have a lot of patients at Fountain that have a very low cholesterol and have a lot of plaque and a 0 calcium score. And we also know people with really high cholesterol that have 0 plaque. And so you need a better test tool, and you don't have the right tools. And the tool is not the stethoscope, which was invented in 1817. The tool is not a statin by itself, which statins, what their one main purpose is, they are anti-inflammatory. They have been proven that they can take a soft plaque, okay, which is one of the it's the type of plaque that can rupture and cause a heart attack, and it can calcify that soft plaque. So you can go from a 0 calcium score, and if you've got plaque and we put you on a high dose statin, you're going to calcify that plaque, and it's going to stabilize the plaque. So hopefully you won't have a heart attack. But the point is, it's not going to tell you that calcium score is not going to tell you how much plaque you have. And so once again, we need better tool sets. And when people need to find these, people need to be able to access these tool sets. The challenge with things like, the CCTA, which I talked about, which read by AI, is that it's only available if you have symptoms. The insurance companies will only pay for it, Medicare will only pay for it if you have symptoms. Well, by the time you get symptoms, you've got probably a 70 to 80% blockage in the main artery of your heart. And the goal here would be to know, when do I have a blockage at 10% or 20%? When I can do something about it. If they put you on, if you have a high calcium score, they're going to put you on a treadmill or do some other testing. You have to have at least a 70, 80% blockage to even get a positive result on that treadmill. But it doesn't mean that you're out of the woods, because it turns out that with some of the data we're looking at right now with a new test that can look at inflammation in the vessel wall, that some of these plaques that are 50% or 25% are highly inflamed, and they may rupture. So once again, you need better data sets and you need a better tool to find out exactly what your cardiac is.
You mean putting somebody on a treadmill and trying to make them have a heart attack is a bad test?
It is counterintuitive when you get on the treadmill and you look over to the right, and you'll see that there's a crash cart right there. So that if you have a heart attack, don't worry, we've got you. And it was interesting. I was giving this talk in Costa Rica with a group of physicians, and I mentioned the fact, I don't understand why we wait until you get on a treadmill, and then we put a crash cart there. And then he said, "Oh, that was my patient today. He had a massive heart attack on the treadmill." And he goes, we worked on it 45 minutes and did CPR. We finally got him back. He's in the ICU. I think he's going to be okay. And I'm like, that's not okay. That's not okay. That's not the right answer. That is not the right answer.
My own mother, the day before her 81st birthday, went to a doctor, and because she was feeling a little odd, she had a massive heart attack in her doctor's office, which was good because they actually got her into surgery in like 30 minutes. And she just started 2 years ago doing weight training at 9. And so she's made a full recovery, like undetectable damage to the heart, which is pretty cool. So I think, the argument for earlier detection than waiting to have the heart attack is good. Certainly, we wouldn't tolerate that argument in aircraft maintenance. No. And then I think also the muscle mass building is definitely a good idea, even if you're 80.
Yeah. So I think that's worth commenting on. So one of the things we talk a lot about at Fountain is certainly early detection. But when we start talking about, when is it too late to do anything? Because I speak to large groups of people, and sometimes everybody in the group is 70 and older, and they're like, well, I'm too old, it doesn't make any difference. Absolutely wrong. That is absolutely wrong. We know today with our data that a 75 or 80-year-old male with hard work and determination and with the right diet can achieve 90% of the lean body muscle mass of a 25-year-old. We just know this is true today, right? I mean, there's a thing called biologic plasticity. Some people call it neuroplasticity. There's certainly genomic plasticity. But it means that your body will adapt over time to different environments and to different stimulus. And when you give it the right tools and you give it the right nutrition, it can put on muscle mass. And in the case of your mother's, her weight training regimen probably accelerated her ability to improve more rapidly than she would have otherwise. So at any given time, you can improve, but it takes 6 months to see the changes, the epigenetic changes. So when you go to the gym, you cannot expect results in the first 60 days. You have to be there for 6 months, and you have to do it consistently over time, because otherwise your body says, you're trying to fake me again. I'm not doing this again. We've been to the gym, 8 times in the last 5 years, and you always go for 2 weeks and then you quit, right? So your body will not start to do those adaptive changes until you get to 6 weeks, and it really needs to be consistency over time. So I think that's super important. But particularly with things like, the early detection with heart disease, I think it's super important that people understand that the existing tools out there may be significantly insufficient. Bears reason, we practice in the U.S. and worldwide what we call population health, meaning that if it's not good for the masses, nobody gets it, okay? And if we can't make it available to the masses, then we're not going to give it to anybody. And I think that mentality is a little different, because we certainly don't do that with our finances. Everybody has a customized financial approach. Everybody has a customized dietary approach, good or bad or indifferent. But the point is, most everything in your life is specialized. except for your healthcare, which is genericized. And what you really need is an N of one precision medicine solution. And that's what we hope to craft over time for everybody, but certainly that's what we do for our members at Fountain Life.
One of the companies that I invested in is a company called Vivan, which does a very precision medicine approach to treating cancer with existing approved drugs off label. And they found mutation patterns that respond to things like psoriasis drugs and other drugs that you wouldn't even imagine have anything to do with cancer. But in the right combination, can really attack a tumor and cause remission. And I agree 1,000%. The more precise and the more attuned the intervention is to your data, I think that's really, really interesting and a really powerful approach. Of course, that means that your data has to be collected.
That's correct.
And that in and of itself has a few risks in today's world.
It does. Speaking of data, by the way, I agree, the precision medicine approach and where we're going, right, and is a big thing. But Bill, Liao, before we go on, your mother, I would love her lottery number picks because of just the idea that's an amazing story, and the blessings that are in that are huge. That she got the chance to recover is a massive thing. So just send me your personal number. I'll call her and get her next bet. The one thing that I think is out there, and that precision medicine mindset, we all agree, is incredibly right. Like, how do you get down to the N of one, for the masses is the big question. And, that kind of spills over into democratization, which is a hot topic. How do you get the masses doing something and moving in the right direction? And is it, worldwide, we have different politics everywhere. I'd say that's politics and policy. It kind of spills over into both. So I kind of throw that out there in the next few minutes to chat about that and get both of your takes on that, and how we think we can do that.
I want to say one thing on that. Unfortunately, for the average human, data is not persuasive. So there was just a really wonderful longitudinal study done on people who have had multiple vaccinations having a lower level of inflammation and ultimately, cohort by cohort, much lower levels of Alzheimer's disease, as well as other forms of dementia. And that data is super compelling if you understand data. But I can already hear the anti-vaxxers out there saying, oh, it's made up, it's just a trick. And that drives me bonkers.
Yeah. So I think I totally agree. Look, I think ultimately, the data has very little value to people unless it's contextualized into something that may be a goal or something that they want. The focus of Fountain Life is longevity. And we are focusing on longevity for distinct reason. One is, certainly personal interest, but more importantly, the idea that, you have to have a goal a little bigger than, your current state to be able to do behavioral change. And if you're really serious about longevity, we can give you the roadmap. The side benefit is that if we fix you or we put you on the road to longevity, we're actually going to improve your health dramatically. And so I think you have to have a goal that's a little bit bigger than yourself. Certainly, I tell people all the time when I talk about Fountain Life, especially when you're in your 50s and 60s, you shouldn't, doing it for yourself is super important, but you should do it for your children and you should do it for your grandchildren, okay? Because your life, your position in their life is extremely important. And you may underrate that, but the reality is sometimes you may be the only person that's holding everybody together and you just don't quite realize how dependent people have become on you. And so it's super important for that. And then also the knowledge transfer to the next generation, not just about health and fitness and longevity, but how to live your life with ethics, how to live your life with morals, how to do these right things, properly and how to learn to get along with people. And unfortunately, today the way we treat people as they age is we tend to warehouse you at a certain point in your life. So we put you into assisted living, we put you into skilled nursing, and we don't even make any real attempt to try to optimize your health while you're in those locations. And you spend the last decade of your life in decline, and that's where in the U.S. particularly, we spend a lot of money, and so people always say, oh, all the money spent in the last 6 months of life. Well, yeah, I get that, but if we'd addressed these problems earlier, you wouldn't be in that nursing home. You'd be at home. You'd be tending your garden. You'd be, volunteering. You'd be taking care of your grandkids, whatever it winds up being. So I think that's super important. As far as the democratization goes, we know that longevity right now, where it sits, is a luxury. We know that. I mean, this is a luxury item because it's an expensive process to go through. I do believe, though, that we are targeting. Right now, most of the people that access our product are in the upper incomes, because they're the ones that have they have the luxury, not only of money, but also the luxury of time and also the resources to be able to pursue other treatments. Over time, most all new technologies that start in the luxury category will move themselves down into the mainstream. And one of the advantages about being at Fountain is that we take care of a lot of people who are very influential, whether they be governmental officials or CEOs of companies. And the idea here is to educate them on what the tool sets that are available, that they can make ultimately available to their employees through self-administered plans for insurance and things of this nature. And so I do believe we will see a democratization of a lot of this technology and even of this precision medicine approach as the cost of the testing comes down, as the cost of the metabolomics comes down, as the cost of all of this comes down. We will see that. And I think ultimately it's going to become the question of, where do you spend your money? Do you spend your money at the end, or do you spend your money at the beginning trying to avoid the problem at the end? And I think that's a philosophical question that is going to take a revamp of healthcare. And whether or not the current administration can do that, or I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of inertia, as you might imagine, here in the health system in the United States to keep the existing plan in place, because there's people make a lot of money the sicker you are. They don't make a lot of money when you're not sick, and that's a challenge.
I just want to pick up quickly on democratization there. We know that the biggest interventions you can do, lift weights, socialize frequently with people of your choice, stop drinking, stop smoking. These are all free. Like, they're actually free for all, forever free. So, and getting vaccinated is cheap. So if you combine all those things together, that's actually a pretty hefty dose of health that everyone can do and everyone can access.
Is how do we quantify people? One of the things that's interesting, there's not a very large, well-quantified database out there for asymptomatic individuals, because we just don't look at asymptomatic people. So I think the more data we have, the better we'll be able to, as we start to assess these different interventions that are coming along, like Cyclarity and others over time, and be able to bring those. One of the other challenges, as is when you get a great intervention like Cyclarity, maybe a drug company buys it, maybe they don't buy it, but even once it's bought, how do you get it out into the hands of people, and how do you get people to use it? And that's, once again, that generational thing. If people have information with their AI, and that's why we keep going back to the AI that we've designed at Fountain, you can actually ask it questions about the things like Cyclarity, and they'll find out that there are tools out there that they may not hear at their doctor's office, because unfortunately the doctors are, they're most up to speed on the latest drug they were detailed by the drug rep that's bringing in lunch for the staff. Unfortunately, that's just how it works here in the U.S. So
yeah,
amazing. Well, we are about 10 minutes from wrapping up, and Dr. Kapp, it's always fun to talk to you because I learn more advancements and more about the various testing opportunities. And you actually also introduce us to a lot of products that are innovative, that are coming. We don't want to follow that 17-year journey of the standard of care as an investor either, right? So thinking about that is an interesting perspective. So great conversation so far. And what I wanted to do to kind of bring us home was just a few rapid fire questions for all three of us. We can all answer quickly. And, the first one, favorite supplement.
Favorite supplement,
So,
protein. That's just it. Protein powder. I mean,
Yeah,
most of us, look, I mean, the reality is vast majority of people are undernourished. As you get older, your gut does not absorb protein the way it used to when you were younger. And so it's really important to be able to get that zero 0.7 to 1, gram of protein per pound of lean body mass, not total body mass. So you need to figure out what your lean body mass is. There are lots of calculations you can do for that. I think that's the number one. And then for me, the second one is actually vitamin D. And I tell people all the time, if you're of Northern European descent, 1/3 of people of Northern European descent, being in the sun won't do it. It's important to get into the sun, but you're going to need a vitamin D supplement, and you need to get your vitamin D levels high enough. It's not really a vitamin, it's actually a prohormone, and it's super important for immune function.
although there's some recent data on women taking vitamin D that throws some of that into question for longevity, uh, I would say omega-3 full spectrum is kind of useful. That's one thing I take. I do take magnesium because the number one supplement that I like to take every day is sleep, a significant quantity of it. And I would also say Akkermansia from Pendulum has been very helpful in keeping my blood sugars down. I mean, my blood sugars are always within normal range because of the combination of Akkermansia, metformin, and this treadmill.
that's great.
That's
I'll
awesome.
add just two things. Creatine for my
Yeah.
workouts and recovery, as well as glutathione. I don't get sore in the gym. And one of the deterrents of people actually not getting off the couch is how they feel if they feel the pain of it. And that would be one I'd recommend, that in addition to the things you guys mentioned. Awesome. One test you want every person, American, Irish, Japanese, everywhere in the world. What one test would we want everyone to get tomorrow?
For me, it would be if we could do it, just because it's still the number one killer worldwide is heart disease. I think if you're over 40, you need a baseline CCTA. It's such a safe test. We've done, we've had 8,000 people. We've had one allergic reaction in 8,000 people. It's just a super safe test. But until you quantify your plaque, you're just guessing.
Yeah.
I
Bill,
concur. Same.
Same. Me too. 18 million people worldwide die of heart attacks every year, and they should. So I agree with that entirely. Okay, fun one. Overrated trend. Like, read all the news in longevity, read all this. What's the overrated thing that people are leaning into too much?
I would say anything you think you're going to boost your NAD levels. I think it's NR and NMN. I think that's probably the most overrated trend that I'm aware of personally. I mean, there's lots of them out there today, but I think that one is the one that has not really passed the necessary level of scientific scrutiny for me.
So it's a toss-up for me between extreme sports, which are likely to disable and kill you before they make you healthy, or the other one that drives me nuts is young blood, like these people who these pseudo vampires. And there was another elegant study that showed that if you just give blood and rehydrate intravenously, you actually develop the same level of impact, because what's actually happening is you're getting toxins out of your bloodstream faster and you're diluting the level of toxicity. So rather than stealing someone else's blood or buying it, just give blood and get yourself a top up intravenously rather than drinking the tea.
I think that one deserves just a double click, just for 1 second, because one of the things that we hear about Bill Kapp is therapeutic plasma exchange. I agree. The Red Cross has been doing that for years, right? The Red Cross, not a longevity center, right? And you start to think about, well, is that part of the misinformation? Is TPE and that's to some degree, and the young blood component, I think it's definitely a category that's getting a lot of talk out there. So what are your thoughts on it?
We do TPE, and one of the reasons we do it is for autoimmune conditions, and also it does have some effects. But what the biggest advantage is not the young blood component of it, is we actually retransfuse albumin, because we take off, unlike when you go to the Red Cross, you take off a certain defined amount of plasma volume there, and you could do that repeatedly, but they're not going to put back albumin. We do the one double-blinded study that's been done at the Buck Institute using therapeutic plasma exchange with albumin as a substitute actually did show a significant reversal of some of the age markers. And that's the one thing that we've seen. The problem with TPE is it's expensive right now, and it is an expensive process. There probably will be some substitutes. The woman, Dr. Comboy, who did most of this early research on the young blood plasma, has actually got a new albumin protocol out now with the modified albumin that it looks like one treatment is all you need, not 6. So I think these are the things that we can kind of look toward. But I do think that the idea that you can do all of these biohacks, and part of the other problem is here, once again, I think whatever your biohack is, measure before and measure after with some sort of objective measurement, and it can't be just I feel better, because that's not going to be that's not going to be adequate, especially for asymptomatic process. But what's important also is to understand that when you start to do too many things, you can't follow any of it. And while Brian Johnson's been amazing at being able to be the personal guinea pig for almost every test that's out there today, it's impossible to know what is really moving the needle for him. Because he does so many interventions, and he puts a spotlight on what those interventions might be. But I can just tell you there's everything from mini follicle therapy, which is questionable. All of these, nobody's done any significant data gathering or significant data research behind them. Certainly very few, if any, double-blinded studies. And whether we need double-blinded studies, it's a case for another time. But I think these are all things that you just need to be careful. But you have to measure before and after to find out.
Amazing. Boldest, this is the last question, and we'll wrap it up. Boldest prediction for healthcare in 2030 and beyond. What do we think this is going to be looking like in 4, 5, 10 years versus where we are today?
My boldest prediction is clarity will work, and there will be no heart disease and nearly no strokes.
Yay. I love
That would be huge for everyone.
Yeah.
That's a good one. What about you, Bill Kapp?
I think in my mind, I think the biggest prediction will be, I think we will see the rise of cell therapy finally. It's been in the offing. I tell people all the time, the body is a very complex structure. It's the most complicated thing we've ever tried to dissect through. It's 40 trillion cells and 1 billion to 10 billion chemical reactions per second per cell. So, if you're starting to think that we're just figuring this out, we need to start thinking about how do you harness subroutines, and how do we figure out the subroutines that are working in the body, even though we may not understand the full complexity. But restoring homeostasis back to systems in the body that aren't working. And for instance, with Dr. Zhao's technique of re-educating your immune cells, using cellular therapy. The cells are smarter than we are, okay? And it's not going to be one single small pill that's going to change your longevity profile. Although in the case of cyclarity, reversing your heart disease is going to have pleiotropic effects. We know that. But what's important is that we start to look at, how do you just see the rise of cell therapy? And I think we will see that in the next decade or less.
Amazing.
And Bill, I have one last question.
Oh, okay, go.
Who would you love to see on this podcast next? So, who would you tune in if we should go to the ends of the earth and find them? Who would you love to hear from?
Me or Todd?
No, that's for you, Bill.
Bill.
For me. I think there are several people I find very, very interesting. I think, profiling some of these early stage scientists are really super interesting. I think somebody like a Dr. Zhao would be interesting to talk to. I think that would be a very interesting podcast to be able to get people to talk about some of this. And then I think also finding the guys who are really doing the true bench research and making this stuff happen. I think those, and having those conversations early on. I think another very interesting podcast would be with Michael Levine at Harvard, who's reprogramming cells using energy fields. So I think there's some really interesting work around that as well.
Fantastic. Dr. Zhao it is. Let's get him on here.
We'll get them. And there we have it. First, Dr. Kapp, thanks for being on, and Bill Liao, appreciate you always chiming in the conversation and helping us understand best ways to live longer and invest smarter. We'll see everybody soon again in episode 3, and thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Todd.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
See ya.